I never really minded Lightfall all that much. Sure, the story sucked, but honestly, the rest of the expansion was alright. However, I'll never forgive them for what they did to my boy Firepower. For those out of the loop. But thankfully, now that Feed the Void has been freed from its ball and chain, the rest of Void Warlock, we can finally go back to... But first, let's go over the equipment. On the subclass, you want Cold Snap Grenades, Feed the Void, and Bleak Watcher. The melee and class ability are up to you, but I prefer Incinerator, Snap, and Healing Rift. For fragments, you want Facets of Balance, Dominance, Solitude, and Ruin, and then the last slot is up to you. Ruin, Balance, and Dominance might seem pretty obvious, but what's the deal with Solitude? And the answer to that is simply, it keeps you alive during damage phases. Solitude on its own is 40%. When paired with the Team DR effect of Song of Flame and 3 resist mods in everybody's Surge setup, the entire team will receive around 70% damage resist from you alone. Although, if you have a well or other DPS support already, you can still use Solitude, but instead of using Song purely for Radiant and Resist, you can just throw birds at your ops with Star Eater scales, which is surprisingly effective. Throw in Facet of Courage for an extra 10% Song damage if you throw a Bleak Watcher first, or Facet of Command if you want some autoloading, which is great when using big mag weapons like Microcosm. To get Isolation to activate consistently during damage, you'll want to run either a precision heavy weapon like a linear, or just run a 900 SMG to activate Bait and Switch, since those activate Isolation pretty quickly. The actual numbers behind Isolation are a bit complicated, but in general, you need to expend just over 20% of your maximum magazine size. This means that about 3 linear shots, or about half a second of consistent fire with a 900 SMG will activate it. As for weapons and armor, you'll want Osmiomancy gloves, and you'll want to shoot for 100 resilience and discipline. As for weapons, you have a bit more options this time. Before, we used Deliverance, but realistically, any special weapon that gets the good Demolitionist will do just fine. By good Demolitionist, I mean weapons that get the full 20% grenade energy per kill, so fusions, shotguns, snipers, and glaives. You can certainly make this build work with a 10% demo weapon, but you may have to reconfigure the kill requirements a little bit to make things line up better. My personal favorite right now is Forthcoming Deviance, the Salvation's Edge Glaive. It can roll demo in the left column and either chain reaction or destabilizing rounds in the right. Initially, I was a chain reaction truther, but here's where I go with destabilizing rounds now. If I see a group of 4 enemies and I shoot them with chain reaction, here's what happens. Assuming my Devour is already active, I'll gain around 30% energy from the first kill, since both Devour and Demolitionist will activate, and then for each of the rest of the kills, I might get 30% back, but chain reaction's detonation speed is completely dependent on your network, your location versus the server's location, how many players or enemies are on screen, etc. As such, if you're playing solo or just have good Wi-Fi that day, there's a pretty good chance that you'll just straight up miss out on a lot of the demo energy because your explosion will trigger before the Demolitionist cooldown finishes. However, the alternative is destabilizing rounds. Destabilizing rounds has almost 3 times the range as chain reaction on special weapons, and most importantly, it allows you to control exactly when the damaging explosions happen. Your goal is going to be to get 2 or 3 demo Devour kills at a time before you throw your turret. With destabilizing rounds, your first kill will apply volatile, and your second shot detonates it, which means that 100% of the time, you'll be able to kill 2 enemies from the same group and get their demo energy, while still keeping the void explosions. There are definitely merits to using chain reaction, though. It's relatively immediate damage, and also does a great job at building Transcendence, and it also has no 2-second internal cooldown like destabilizing does, so it will activate much more frequently. On top of this, volatile explosions count as ability kills, same as Shatter, so they can actually activate Feed the Void. On top of that, they're also light debuffs, meaning destabilizing rounds charge your light transcendence meter super fast. Realistically though, feel free to replace destabilizing rounds or even Deviance itself with any other special weapon with the good demo. The closest alternative is Judgment of Kel'Grath, which can roll demo Wellspring or demo Incan, which will hopefully do a similar job to destabilizing rounds when it comes to building light energy. I usually prefer energy slot weapons for this build, specifically because I want to focus on light energy and get the melee regen from Facet of Balance. However, there is something to be said about kinetic slot weapons, because if they deal darkness damage, they'll give even more grenade energy due to Facet of Balance. However, you will be losing a huge portion of your light transcendence because you're already pretty darkness focused. For the kinetic slot, Deliverance is one of the first ones that comes to mind. However, with the improved grenade regen for darkness weapons from Facet of Balance, 10% demo weapons are also much more usable. As far as 10% demo weapons go, there are 2 major standouts in the kinetic slot, those being the Call and Lost Signal. On the Call, you can roll demo Hatchling. For a long time, Hatchling was an absolute meme of a perk, but now, not so much. A while back, some changes to Hatchling were made that allow it to activate on both precision and multi-kills for weapons that have the perk, instead of one or the other. This means that every 3 kills you'll generate a Threadling. This Threadling not only activates Demolitionist and the Devourer refresh to give you back over 15% grenade energy per kill, but it'll also proc Hatchling itself again. If your Threadling gets kills, it'll add those kills to the internal multi-kill timer for Hatchling, meaning as you produce Threadlings, your Hatchling kill requirement will be shortened, meaning you produce more Threadlings. Lost Signal is also a great option, since similarly to the Call, it has a bit of damage spillage, in that even if you only aim to target 2 enemies, you'll most likely hit more of them and get more grenade energy than you expect. Now, all of that being said, I will be talking about this build as if you're using an energy special weapon with 20% demo, so you may need to do some reconfiguring to make it work exactly like mine does. For armor mods, you'll want a Siphon matching your main demo weapon, a Fastball, Bolstering Detonation, Momentum Transfer, and I like 1 charged up and 2 reserves or resists on my chest piece, but feel free to run 3 if needed. 1 stacks on stacks and 2 scavs on your boots, and on your bond you'll be running Special Finisher, Proximity Ward, and the last slot's up to you, but I like to run Reaper. For the loop with your mods, you're just going to be getting 2 weapon kills and collecting an orb. Collect 2 orbs and you get a Special Finisher, which is a special brick for your entire team. On top of that, if you have charged up, you'll have spare armor charge left over, so your next Special Finisher will only require 1 orb. It's hard to articulate just how important Special Finisher is in the current meta. Ultimately, if you're using a purely heavy weapon damage rotation, the chances are very high that you can be outputting more damage if you were able to incorporate some kind of special swapping into it. However, as some of you Izzy users may notice when you try this, special ammo generation becomes a big issue. But with a build like this that can pretty seamlessly integrate Special Finisher into its playstyle, you can be very liberal with your special usage during damage. As such, Special Ammo Finisher is going to be a requirement. Due to your close range nature with the glaive, you'll be right in the thick of it. Getting tons of finishers should be one of the first things you drill into your head. 2 orbs, finisher, repeat. In fact, a lot of the time I myself will run just a purely heavy damage loadout that crutches heavily on Song of Flame and Apotheosis Veil to carry my damage, and run a random primary in my kinetic slot just so I can focus on finishers. If I'm doing everything right, which I usually don't, I can crank out upwards of 8 bricks a minute. In general, for this build, your goal is to freeze things, and the best way to do that are Bleak Watchers and Cold Snaps, and you have 2 major ways to generate grenade energy for them, on-kill energy and grenade duplication. Both of these methods thrive in certain environments and lag behind in others, so you're going to need to know both of them and know exactly when to do which and when. On-kill energy is pretty simple. Your Demolitionist Weapon and Devourer will both passively give you energy back as you kill things. It'll adjust based on the enemy killed, but at a minimum, a kill with your weapon with Devour active will give you a little under a third of your grenade. If you remember the old build, this is a little worse than that, which totaled to roughly 45% energy per kill with firepower. But unshackling yourself from needing charge with light is well worth it, because without it, you can ignore the frequency of your kills, as well as needing to re-obtain kills when you die. And despite needing 3 weapon kills per grenade now, passive shatter kills and faceted balance procs will help to bring it back down to 2. Something you're really going to want to do is get into a rhythm. One of the most important things in Destiny is knowing your limits, and you really need to make sure you know exactly how many kills you need to charge a turret, and as such, testing your grenade energy to make sure you know what you'll need consistently is crucial. With forthcoming deviants, my rotation is this. Similarly to the old build, I treat 1 grenade charge as a battery. In essence, I know that 2 kills will give me roughly 2/3 of a grenade back, if Devour's active. So what I'll do is act as if I have 1 grenade charge and 3 spare thirds of a grenade to use. This way, I can throw a grenade, get 2 glaive kills, and then fill in the last third using my battery, which will be replenished by spare kills. On the surface, this doesn't really seem useful, because all you're doing is thinking about your build differently, but bear with me. By doing this, you can read your grenade energy and immediately know for how much longer you'll be able to throw out turrets. If you have 2 spare thirds left, then you know you can do this combo 2 more times. It gives you a very easily readable meter to look at that tells you exactly what your limits are, and this meter can be recharged by just killing additional enemies, which chain reaction and destabilizing rounds on deviants do super well. Enemies in this game vary in numbers, and being able to stockpile energy for when they're scarce and recharge it when they're plentiful is a super powerful skill to have and makes you much more consistent. And now, it might be becoming obvious as to why I want to get my Transcendence back super fast. It's not just because it's super powerful, but because it gives you a full grenade refresh. If you know you have Transcendence to fall back on, you can start playing way more aggressively and drop down a huge amount of turrets at the expense of completely draining your grenade battery. But when you pop Transcendence, it doesn't matter because you get a reset. On-kill effects are what you're going to want to be focusing on whenever you have easy-to-kill red bar enemies. You'll want to just be getting up in their face, start getting into a rhythm. Kill 2 enemies, throw a turret. Kill 2 enemies, throw a turret. You see a large number of shatters or chain reaction kills happen, treat it like a battery recharge and check to see how much you have left now. The consistency of throwing turrets here is key. It's all well and good to get 3 kills per turret, not having to worry about the battery at all, but what do you do when there aren't very many enemies left? Destiny tends to spawn enemies in bursts instead of consistently over time, so when kills become scarce, you need the battery to fall back on if you want to consistently place turrets everywhere. However, where this build really differs from the old one is with grenade duplication. Grenade duplication is a pretty old technique and has been in the game since Witch Queen. In essence, your Osmomancy gloves grant grenade energy back for each enemy damaged by your Cold Snap grenade. Because of this, if you have the right group of enemies, you can throw a Cold Snap grenade and throw a Bleak Watcher, and Osmomancy will regenerate both of them. Now that's the key, the right group of enemies. One difficult part of grenade duplication is figuring out whether or not the group even has enough energy to give you what you need. Osmomancy gives escalating amounts of grenade energy. Figure out how much energy you get from each enemy, here's what you'll do. First, take their enemy rank, which will range from 1 to 4. Enemy rank is basically representative of the type of enemy in its race. So Thralls and Dregs would sit at rank 1, Acolytes and Vandals at 2, Knights and Captains at 3, etc, etc. Destiny Massive Breakdowns has a full list of all enemy types and their tiers in the Destiny Data Compendium if you need it, which will be in the description. You'll also want to add the number corresponding to their health bar type. Red is 0, orange is 1, mini-boss and champ is 2, boss is 3. Once you add all those numbers together, you'll receive roughly 12% energy back per point. In reality, the numbers are a little off from that figure, but that's a good general principle to run by. And you really don't need to be super accurate with it. In general, if you can off the top of your head see 8 or more points, go ahead and throw, because that'll be more than 100% return. For example, if I see a group of 3 Acolytes, with one being an orange bar and the other 2 being red bars, I know that the big guy is tier 3 due to the orange bar, and the little ones are 2 each. So that gives me about 85% grenade energy back. Now on the surface, this doesn't seem like a super good trade. You're losing 100% of a grenade and only gaining 85% back. However, there's a cool little trick you can do with Cold Snaps. Remember earlier when I said that Cold Snaps grant energy back based on each enemy damaged by them? Well, as it turns out, direct impacting an enemy with it will also count as a damage event and will grant you energy back. It will also slow the enemy, which means you can stun overloads in a pinch if needed. Now what this means is that if you're accurate with it, any enemy that you choose will count twice towards your grenade regen. So now if I direct impact the orange bar Acolyte with the grenade and let it freeze them, we're looking at 10 points total, or 120% grenade energy, which is a net bonus. There are also 2 additional techs that you can use to further improve your duplication. Now it's important to remember that Osmomancy activates off of damage, not off of freeze. So if you can find a way to make Osmomancy damage multiple enemies multiple times, you can get even more energy. Enter the rebound tech. When Cold Snap grenades spawn a Seeker, that Seeker will look for any non-frozen enemies. More specifically, it always goes for the closest one. So if you have a big enemy that can survive a shatter, along with a few smaller ones some distance away, you can throw a Cold Snap, and once it freezes the big guy, you shatter him immediately. This means that with 2 more Seekers remaining, the Cold Snap will go and freeze the other group of enemies, and then because the first guy is no longer frozen, it can now rebound and freeze him again. This means that off of 1 Red Bar Knight and Acolyte, you can end up getting over 120% of your grenade back. Now the difficulty in using this method is that it's rare in a lot of content to find an enemy that can even survive the first shatter, and even if you do, it's pretty conditional as to whether or not you'll get it to work. I'd recommend just always shattering a big enemy that you frozen with a Cold Snap if it's the first one frozen, just for the chance that you might get it to work. However, this next and final tech with grenade duplication is pretty controllable and is extremely powerful if you can master it. Before I reveal it, let's go over some of the deeper specifics of Cold Snaps. When a Cold Snap grenade hits the ground, it creates a Seeker. Nowadays, these Seekers just seek out non-frozen targets. They'll always spawn moving in the direction of the nearest non-frozen enemy, and if none are within range, it'll just fly off in the direction that the Cold Snap was moving before it hit the ground. Seekers do not just freeze single enemies when they hit them, as you probably know. Instead, they produce 2 cones aligned tip to tip at the location of the Seeker whenever it detonates. These cones will also be aligned with the velocity vector of the Seeker. So, enemies in front of, behind, and maybe some on the sides will get hit by it. What this means is that if you have 2 enemies that are relatively close together, you can direct impact one of them and have the Cold Snap freeze only that one because of the cone behavior. Then, because the next Seeker will spawn pointing towards the next unfrozen enemy, both of the Acolytes will get caught in the freezing cones, making the first one count for twice. With 2 Acolytes, of course, this isn't very useful, but with a moderately sized group of 3 or more, you can really start cranking out grenade energy. If you have a large cluster of enemies, you can kind of envision how the Cold Snap might travel between them. There will be specific hotspots where you can throw your Cold Snap to activate this effect more often. For example, if the group is more of an amorphous blob with one straggler out front, you can throw your Cold Snap in a way that bounces off the straggler and hits only it and the enemies immediately next to it. Then it'll flip directions to the inside of the group and create freeze cones that hit all of them. It's very hard to teach the intuition for this, because you have to think really fast about it when you're competing with teammates for kills. In general, though, you'll want to try and make the seeker direction align roughly tangent to the main group of enemies by envisioning the line created between the Cold Snap impact spot and the nearest unfrozen enemy. This is because by doing it tangent, you can immediately freeze the edge of the group without freezing the entire thing, and then the next seeker will already be in the perfect spot to shoot directly into the center of the group, once again catching the fringe enemies. These kind of opportunities are the core of grenade duplication. Not only can you set up freezes, but you can also effectively gain energy from getting no kills at the same time, allowing either your teammates to clean them up, to field their own kill-based builds, or allowing you to kill them if you need to change gears to your own kill effect. Now, if there's one thing you should take away from this entire grenade duplication section, it's that enemies that register for a lot of points are extremely powerful for this build. Any enemy with a total point count of 4 or higher becomes a grenade generator for you. By direct impacting them with a grenade, you instantly get 100% of your grenade back since it hits them twice, once on impact and then once when it seeks along the ground. And then you still have 2 Cold Snap Seekers that will go and try to generate more energy. Then you can just shoot them to shatter them and throw another. What you want to aim for is starting off with 2 grenades at the ready, throwing a Cold Snap at the 4-pointer, and then immediately throwing a turret. If done right, you should be throwing the turret out of your hand pretty much the moment the second Seeker is created. This is important because if you're not decisive with this and end up hesitating, you'll almost certainly overflow your grenade energy with the second Seeker, and end up wasting some. Remember that enemies are a resource. In controlled numbers, the strongest builds in the game thrive because they're given ample fuel. This build is sort of the opposite. It thrives off of generating something from nothing, and also slows everything down to the point where kill-based builds can just go crazy in all types of content. And you're no slouch when it comes to raw damage or on-kill effects either. Warlock's Transcendence Grenade is an incredible utility tool, providing one of the longest lasting weaken effects in the game, a solid amount of damage, and a 12-second long suppression effect that disables anything smaller than a champion. On top of that, when just haphazardly thrown into groups of enemies, Cold Snaps have some of the highest base grenade damage output in the game, simply due to the fact that their damage scales with the number of enemies hit just due to how shatters work. A single 4-pointer could allow you to just sit there and literally duplicate turrets without killing a single enemy for minutes at a time if they have enough health. On top of that, there's an additional trick that happens with champions. It's not very controllable, but most of the time when you direct impact a champion, it'll actually hit them 3 times as long as you aim for the upper body. I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but I believe it may have something to do with the fact that champions have no neutral stagger mechanic. Most of the time, enemies will duck down or even back up when you throw a Cold Snap at them, but champions don't usually do this, so my theory is that champions tend to move forwards into the Cold Snap without a stagger, and as it bounces off of them, they walk into it, making it hit twice, and then it hits the ground, does the Seeker, and hits a 3rd time. Auto-shattering bosses are even crazier, because their auto-shatter will regenerate 50% of your grenade per enemy it hits, including the boss if it isn't currently immune. For the most basic form of this build, your goal is just to get used to the 2 forms of grenade generation. Don't worry about turret placement yet or your teammates, you just want to get to the point where you feel comfortable with seeing a group of enemies and instantly knowing how much energy you can squeeze out of them and how much that will be. The name of the game here is APM, or actions per minute. In general in Destiny, there will be a short cooldown on any action you do, be it grenade, melee shoot, or anything else. Most of the time, these cooldowns will be completely non-cancelable, but only to the thing that started them. This means that by rotating between different actions instead of doing the same one all the time, you can increase the number of actions per minute you do. Kind of ironic how the main goal of Prismatic is to balance your usage of light and dark, because this build is basically the same way but for different actions. Even if you're in a perfect situation to do purely kill-based generation, you'll still want to be looking out for ways to duplicate grenades, because being able to do both means that you'll naturally be alternating between generation methods, which lets you cancel those short cooldowns and improve APM. Remember, saving a quarter of a second on an animation cancel is not very much on its own. Think of it this way, if I play for 1 minute, and on average produce about 1 turret every 3 or so actions, and perform 1 action per second, saving a quarter second per animation cancel, you would end up being able to squeeze in an additional 20 actions per minute, which would correspond to an additional 6 or 7 turrets a minute. Small things are small, but when they accumulate, they become super significant. At first, just practice these things. Just try to keep your actions per minute high, and achieve a balance between using on-kill effects and duplication. Next, you're going to have to figure out what to do with all that energy. And the most obvious answer would just be turrets, but where? Ultimately, that depends entirely on the flow of the encounter. You need to place turrets where you want the enemies to stop, and sometimes this isn't right at their spawn door. Think of, if you were in the area that needs a turret, where would you be standing, and where would you expect the ads to appear? If you can answer that question, then place a turret that covers that location. It doesn't do anyone any good to jam up 20 enemies at their spawn door where nobody can see them, and then have them all rush you down when the turret expires. If you're doing hard content and you'll have ability energy available during the encounter, remember in your mind where enemies are coming from and turret it. Watch people in mechanical roles to see where they hang out, and try to cover them with turrets that freeze enemies in locations that are easy for them to see and reach. And most importantly, if you're gonna place a turret for somebody else, try to be consistent about it. Get into a cycle where you have a certain number of spawn doors that you rotate throwing turrets between, so that hopefully none of them have downtime. Nothing is worse than having a turret cover your door for 10 minutes straight and then suddenly disappears and you get swarmed. Your amount of turrets will always depend on the encounter, but a solid number is 4 to 6 consistently up at a time, though it's theoretically possible to have 12 out at any given point in time. If you can find between 4 and 6 high threat locations that you can shut down for the whole encounter, then you've done your part. If you have any questions about the build or anything, just hop into the Discord in the description and at me. I usually don't reply to DMs, but I usually do for at messages in the server.